Welcome to Unfixed. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence and the institution of higher education. I am Zach Justice, Professor of Communication Studies and Director of Faculty Development.
And I'm Nick Janos, Professor of Sociology.
We are employees of Chico State, and we will discuss some of our work, but this podcast is not affiliated with Chico State, and the views expressed here are not representative of the university. All right, Nick. Here we are, not quite an emergency or newswire episode, but kind of one that we decided to jump on pretty quickly. What are we talking about today?
Today we're talking about a new convergence here, that AI disruption to higher ed is meeting up with the new federal earnings test that's going into effect. And we're going to say today that we wanted to jump on this because there's a lot of new conversation around data coming out about hiring for recent college grads and some of the troubles that recent grads are having trying to get jobs. And then that therefore reinforces the idea that, college is not worth it. It maybe is a money pit and so on and so forth. I just wanted to start this off. I really want to say that let's call out Jeffrey Selingo for an excellent article, What is College For in the Age of AI, that appeared in The Intelligencer this past week in January 2026. And that really got us thinking a lot about this and prompted us to not only do this episode, but also write a piece that will hopefully be out sometime soon.
Yeah, we don't agree with everything that's in that piece, but it's one of the more thoughtful examinations that we've seen of this phenomenon of AI impacting job markets. Some great interviews with people that are recent grads that are trying to find jobs, some interesting possible solutions. So I totally agree, worth a read. Nick, kick us off. What is generative artificial intelligence doing to early career people, recent college grads? They're all really happy about it, right?
Oh yeah, this is just boom. They're just getting right into there and getting to work. No, I think, look, we've been hearing a lot about how AI is going to lead to job loss for people who've already been employed. And Amazon just today and on January 28th announced they're going to lay off 16,000 workers. I mean, they have a million plus workers, but they're laying off 16,000. And one of the things that the CEO cited was AI, because they're actually finding that they're using AI to replace tasks, and then therefore they don't need some of the workers. We can talk later about underlying causes there. But for recent grads, so people just getting out of the university, this is quite different. This is where you go to school, you pay the money, you have an expectation that this is going to give you a leg up in the job market. But more grads are finding that it's very difficult to find a job. And some of the reports, both in the one we mentioned at the outset, there's also a PBS news that we'll link as well, that many of these graduates are reporting that or some of the employers are reporting, that they are finding that they can actually utilize AI in some of those skill sets that they would use or hire entry-level workers for. And so they don't need to hire them at the same quantity or rate that they had in the past. The data, of course, is still murky, a lot of questions there, but basically graduates getting out, they're not finding the job market strong. There was a report that there was a 1% higher unemployment rate for recent grads than the average across the United States. So that's kind of significant indicator there. So that's the basic of it.
Hold on, Nick. I've been living my life by the mantra that AI wasn't going to take your job, but somebody using AI was going to take your job. Are you telling me that hopium I've been huffing for the last 2 years isn't accurate?
Yeah, put that paper back down, Zach, and look at reality clearly. But one thing I wanted to hear, just add is that I think what the article we mentioned from Selingo highlights is that there's a inequality here, that elite grads from elite schools are still attractive because they come with stronger skills, both cultural kind of capital or other skills and networks, and that lower tier from graduates from lower tier colleges are cheaper. So those are also appealing, but it's those mid-tier universities and their graduates that are starting to see this problem in the greatest numbers.
Yeah, I'm going to make a note to myself about going ahead and accepting that job at Yale I've been offered because it seems more secure than the one here. All right. No, This obviously hits home for Nick and I and lots of people in the CSU system, and I think some of the UCs as well, because we are at that mid-tier level. And this is something we talked about in a sort of emergency episode that we recorded back in the early summer after the Kevin Roose piece about the AI job apocalypse. And there have been sort of murmurs about this over the time, but the employment data is really messy right now because of tariffs, because of the government shutdown. I will say, and Nick, I might be more convinced of this than you are.
Hmm.
It does seem like we are, every sort of anecdote and study and labor report that comes out, it does seem like we are seeing AI job market disruption and that it's not just CEOs that like to fire people and they're looking for cover. Am I more convinced
Yeah.
of that than you
Well,
are?
I still have a high skepticism. I'm sure you do too, for corporate speak or CEO speak or institution speak. Because look, if you're running one of these businesses or organizations and you're worried about the next 12 months to 2 years, or let's just say in that time frame, about the economy, about growth, about revenue, profits, whatever, and you want to have sort of a hiring freeze, you need to have some kind of justification for a hiring freeze. So I'm skeptical in the sense that there are a lot of existent reasons why companies might want to pause on hiring, especially for upskilled workers. So I'm not convinced 100% yet that what we're seeing in the data is directly what they're saying. Oh, it's AI. But I think that's a possibility. And look, these stories have these very good anecdotal reports from grads who are applying to like 150 jobs and not getting any of them. And then companies saying, look, we're actually using these AI tools to do like 80% of that job.
And just to be super clear before we move on, our understanding of what's happening inside some of these larger firms isn't that it is a one-to-one replacement. It's what Nick said earlier. It's a task function. So if you can imagine like a social media marketing company, you would have entry-level workers and they would spin up, oh, how about these different taglines or this sort of set of tweets? Well, now you don't need those people to do that particular thing. Maybe you need one to sort of catalog that, but instead, oftentimes what you're seeing is these sort of superpowered people that have experience and expertise inside these firms that then, with these tools, are able to unlock a lot more productivity than they've been able to do before. And that sort of accomplishment of tasks ends up displacing a lot of work that entry level workers would do.
That's a really good point. Yeah, great, well said. So let's move to the second force that's converging here with the AI. Zach, you know a lot more about the earnings test. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so this was a provision in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. And Nick, I've yet to land on an attractive acronym or shorthand for that. I've heard lots of them, and they're all bad, like O triple B A, like none of them are good. So let's
What happened to the
just
big beautiful bill? I mean, can't we
yeah,
just call
let's
it
maybe
that?
we'll just stick with that. But there was kind of a weird higher ed provision in the act just called the earnings test. And I was real hot on this early because I actually downloaded the legislation and fed it to Notebook LM because I wanted to better understand some of the implications for higher ed. And then there was a little bit of reporting from Inside Higher Ed on their podcast and some other places. But the gist of this is the federal government wants to measure the effectiveness of individual college majors. So, not like Chico State in general, or not like sociology in general, but a sociology degree at Chico State. And they want to measure that against the early career earnings of non-college graduates. So there's still a negotiated rulemaking about this. This might be resolved by the time that this episode airs. And so there's a little bit of ambiguity. But the idea is that you would take the early career earnings of somebody with a communication degree or with a computer science degree, and then you would measure those against somebody in the same age bracket that is a non-college degree earner. And there's part about that that actually makes sense on paper, right? You want people to have a return on their investment for college. And there's part of that that's not dissimilar from some of the guidelines and rules that were passed under previous administrations, including the Obama administration. There was a do no harm provision that I don't want to get into here. But this is really specific down to the major level. And the other thing that is disruptive, especially for states like ours, and we'll get into this later, is that it takes the state as a whole rather than a service region or a metro area. So if a program of study or college major fails this test, then they're put on probation, and all the current students have to be notified that the program's on probation. And then, unless they pull themselves above that threshold, a student can no longer get federal financial aid to enroll in that program, which, as you can imagine, would pretty much be a death spiral of enrollment for almost any program, not just because of the financial aid, but because of what it signals to those students. Hey, you're investing in a degree and you are not going to get a return on that investment. I mean,
Hmm.
some students might stay the course, but for parents, for borrowers, that is not an attractive bargain.
Wow, yeah, this is really significant. I mean, I had heard about this about 6 months ago, and it didn't really sink in until I read that piece this weekend and we started talking about this. I mean, this could really damage programs across, for example, this California State University system here in California and elsewhere. I mean, this is like red alarm.
It is. And, Nick, early on, there were some pretty good analyses, including one that we'll link in the show notes. This is mainly affecting things like certificate programs at a lot of for-profit colleges, which I always thought was kind of ironic because I know that Trump has always been sort of upset about how Trump University was treated by the higher education community, but then this provides standards that hurt sort of things like that, even though that was never accredited, but sort of it's in the same sort of genre. And there were early indications like, hey, this really isn't going to impact four-year degrees, especially not at public institutions. But the Chronicle, and again, we'll have this in the show notes, has an interactive tool where you can search for different majors, different universities, and there are actually nine undergraduate programs within the CSU and four within the UC that all indications are going to fall below the threshold for this
Mm,
test. And they're
okay.
mainly located in the fine arts, but I did a little kicking around. And in some other states with similar sort of urban rural divides like we have in California, Nick, there's a liberal arts degree, and that's oftentimes the pathway to K-12 education in
Hmm.
Western Washington at a
Mm,
public university that is going to fall below that threshold, right?
wow.
Like that's, the implications of this, even if things stay as they are right now, are pretty unnerving.
Yeah. Now, we won't get into today about all the political reasons why the Trump administration may have gone this route. We have spoken and written in the past about, MAGA and higher ed, but one of the big things that we spoke about yesterday in private that I wanted to share here is this really kind of exposes the weakness of the debt model of funding for higher education, rather than state funding or even where students pay a nominal fee to get an education. Over the last 20 plus years or so, most places have built sort of a debt funded model, whether private or public, federal backed loans and things like that. So it's really exposing the weakness and the trap that I think higher ed has gotten itself into, by following that model.
Yeah, 30 years ago, this is a non-story because hardly anybody's taking out loans.
Hmm.
The other piece about this that Nick and I talked about offline is that there is a world too in which this forces students into private debt markets instead of federal debt markets. And that's long been a hobby horse, especially of libertarian politics, get the government out of lending. This is some, the privatization of Social Security, all these sort of like, we're going to strip out federal stuff and make it part of private equity. And again, I don't, Nick and I could talk and have talked literally all day about these things before. We'll spare the listeners that because we
So,
want to get to these things are going to converge.
yeah.
And I'm going to say it out loud, even though it seems pretty obvious. We're going to spend a ton of time here, but as generative AI depresses wages and employability for recent grads, One of the things that that will do is it will push more programs below the earning threshold because generative AI seems to have an outsized impact on the employability of people doing entry level knowledge work. Most of the people that we are educating in public universities. So, like, if you're an electrician, or if you're a plumber, or if you work in auto repair or retail sales, an area that doesn't have a degree, the impact is more mitigated. So the threshold for the sort of average for non-college degree earners is unlikely to move all that much. In fact, with some of the immigration changes, it might actually go up. But the pressure from the technology is going to push more programs underneath that threshold. And I think that we'll probably start to see that relatively quickly. This is a little bit of speculation, but it just seems so obvious. I don't feel like we need to move this to baseless speculation.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move into talking about California as a stress case. So for those of you who aren't from California or don't know much about California, it is in some ways a microcosm of the whole entire United States in one state, right? It's a massive economy that has an incredible divide between the urban centers and the rural areas of California. The rural areas of California are some of the lowest income and with highest rates of poverty in all of the United States. Um, and that divide is extreme, right? We know if you know about Silicon Valley and Hollywood and all that. There is a huge gap between labor markets at the statewide and regional level. And now there's been some convergence there we'll talk about in a minute. But so if these benchmarks are set at the statewide, it really distorts that divide between rural earners and urban earners in the labor market. And that's going to create a problem for rural universities or graduates of those places who are trying to stay in those areas or people who want to migrate into the sort of rural places. And there's disclosure here, Chico is where Zach and I are, is a rural city in the North State.
Yeah, we're a rule serving institution. And I mean, I'm from a very rural area of the state. It's about 25 miles south of Chico, a non-town called East Biggs. And I mean, that's not even that extreme. In the far north of the state, in these areas like
Hmm.
Modoc County and Lassen County, we're talking about places that are designated as a county, but maybe have like 15 to 40,000 people in them. Property values are low, jobs are really low, but you still need people to go there and teach school, right? Like there's
Hmm.
still kids there that need to be educated.
Right.
There's still,
Healthcare,
we need healthcare in those places,
social
right?
services, all this
Yes.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
they,
so, I
Mhm.
mean, the thing is, you could make half of what somebody in the trades that works in San Jose or works in San Diego does in Modoc County, and you'd be doing pretty well for yourself.
Mhm.
But now suddenly you can't get the degree that allows you to teach fifth grade in Lassen County because because of this stipulation of the legislation. So
Well,
it's pretty dicey.
it is. Also, these are areas that already have shortages of police officers, teachers, healthcare workers. I mean, even here in Chico, with over 100,000 people, it's a struggle to attract the professionals that some of the more urban areas or cities of California attract. Even one of the reasons is because the cost of living actually has gone up in rural areas. Um, because over across California, with not building very many houses and housing policy and all that kind of stuff, the cost of living has increased across California, even despite that there's these earning gaps. And one thing that's interesting about California is that the trades that so people without a college degree do get on average paid more here in California. And so the trades actually have higher wages. And then the urban areas also set the bar for professional or college degree wages, again, distorting the earning potential of the rural areas.
And this is the case in other states as well,
Mhm.
right? Like upstate New York and Western New York are nothing like New York City. And Seattle is light years away from what Eastern Washington looks like, right? Like it's not unique to California. I do think that the expanse here is broader than it is in some of these areas, but I think lots of states are going to feel this pinch. We're
Hmm.
feeling it and we're sort of living it, but this is not going to be a California only problem.
Absolutely, for sure. Well, what should we do about this? What's on the roadmap here?
So Nick and I have talked about this before. We recorded a podcast about it before, one of our first ones about the mismatch of change, the rate of change at universities versus the technology. We call that one slow university. And I do think this is another area where we have to look at the processes that are on campuses to figure out how is it that we can fast track changes. Things like working with Career Center more directly and revising curriculum, helping students be more intentional about finding work and showing them career paths right out of college. Just this morning, I listened to the latest episode of, I think it's College Uncovered, and they talked about a couple of universities. I'm going to mispronounce this, but Brandis University and some others, these liberal arts colleges that have started to be really intentional about mapping degrees onto career paths and helping people see, like, okay, you're getting this degree in arts education. Here's an internship. Here are the different paths forward. Here's what this might look like in 3 to 5 years. Let's get you on track early. And I know some faculty aren't going to like that, but this is going to cease to be a matter of preference and start to be a matter of survival pretty quickly. I mean, the provision in the Big Beautiful Bill Act, that is supposed to hit this summer. Like we're talking
Hmm.
months away from now.
Yeah,
Nick,
it
what else
does.
can we do?
Well, I think I would like to see that presidents and provosts of university, or however you label them at your university, and then the systems themselves put this on the policy map and create a roadmap for what they're going to do, how they're going to respond from the top down, but then also clearly communicate this to campuses, to faculty, to programs that can make these changes and understand what this means. And some of it will be, things that we don't know what to do yet, but it's that clear communication that is going to first have to come with those administrators putting it on their policy agenda.
And we should say the cupboard is not bare, right? Like we have assets that are in place. We've recorded several times about the relationship that the CSU has with OpenAI. And I know there are mixed feelings about that, but that means that we already have a sort of inside track and a relationship to some of the adaptation that we're probably going to need in order to better prepare graduates. The new CSU wide document, CSU Forward, that sort of lays out the framework for what we're going to do as a system. It's very workplace focused. And when I first read it, I was kind of like, I feel like maybe some stuff is lost, but now that I'm sort of reading the room, I'm thinking maybe that's the kind of framework that other systems are going to need to put in place in order to make the kind of changes that we're likely going to need to change in order to make sure that the right programs survive.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so well, that's our conversation there about the merging of these twin pressures. Of course, joining a whole bunch of other ones that we've covered on this podcast, and that you are all, of course, living through as well. But before we leave, we've got a segment of bad analogy. Take it away, Zach.
So we've heard this several times like, oh, this is just like other labor market disruptions. Like there was an auto plant here and now that's outsourced, or there's an industry and now we've had some closures. And that is an incredibly bad analogy because usually when that sort of thing happens, the workers from one area are absorbed into other industries or other regions or can be upskilled in particular areas. But the totality of the disruption here means this isn't like the local auto parts plant closing, right? This isn't, the chicken processing plant moved from here to Juarez, right? Like it is all the things across an entire swath of the economy closed. Nick, you've been thinking about this in a little bit more sophisticated way than I have. Do you want to share a quick preview with the listeners?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about it. Think of a long rectangle bar of all professional and information technology workers, from teachers, doctors, radiologists, lawyers, everything in there in the professional bracket. This is as if we can imagine across all this whole sector, which is probably the biggest sector in our economy, losing X percentage of them, 5% at one time, or 10% of them just never being hired in the first place, those entry jobs going away, right? So it could be the real shrinking of this really wide bar of the professional middle class that relies on their degree, credentialism, and the skills that they learn in university and their skills with technology to carry out their job. And I think that unlike the plant moving from one place to the other, that can have those local impacts and there'll be sectoral impacts. This is literally a whole category of a professional middle class that is going to feel the shrinkage all at the same time.
So that's a bad analogy. And Nick, I hadn't planned on this, but if we were doing podcast bingo, I think that Unfixed just crossed off another square, and that's using a purely auditory medium to describe a visual chart.
Yeah, I'm sure that's
So
not in the rule book, but I broke it.
we've made it. I mean, now we have made it.
Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can find our writing on meltsintoair.org and connect with us on Blue Sky at meltsintoair.bsky.social and on LinkedIn, Zach Justice and Nick Janos. Find these links and more in the show notes. If you have feedback or want to share an idea, email us at unfixed@meltsintoair.org. Thank you to Jamie Gunderson for producing and editing the show.